I have been searching.
Welcome to Following the Fire, a podcast for Christians who are rethinking their faith and need a safe place to doubt. As we wander through the spiritual wilderness, we want to find and follow God wherever the pillar of fire leads.
And just like God's people in the Bible, we get lost, we miss the point, and we don't have all the answers. But maybe that's okay. We're on this journey together. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Steve.
Even on my heart.
Hey everybody, welcome to Following the Fire. I'm extremely excited to talk to our guest. We have Kate Boyd here. I don't know exactly how I found you, but I'm extremely grateful that I did. I don't know how you do all of the things that you do, and I'm sure we'll get into what some of those things are. But can you introduce yourself, Kate, and tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. I am Kate Boyd. I live in the Dallas, Texas area with my husband and my dog. And by day, I do communications work for a donor events team at a university. By later in the day, I go to seminary. And then in all the other spare time that I managed to rustle up, I do some writing and speaking and just kind of helping people to navigate, faith when it gets really messy when you're figuring it out. So that's me.
So I think I found you. I was looking for podcasts who were doing a very specific thing. Because before we started trying something, I wanted to see, is someone else already doing this and doing it better? And it turns out you were already doing this. You were hosting these small group format podcasts where people just get to talk about the Bible.
Yeah.
Which is just like a dream come true. It's like a fantasy to just get to
it's so fun. I think it's my favorite thing I do. I wish I had time to keep doing it. So I have to transition the podcast to a different format for at least a year because, as aforementioned, I don't have a ton of spare time. And coordinating it is a bear. Like every episode takes about 10 man hours on my part.
Wow.
And that's on a low end. And so, but it is my favorite thing. I was on a walk walking my dog and just had this idea that maybe I'll just bring people together and we'll talk through a couple of chapters of scripture together. And so I sort of made a plan and we do it. And it's so much fun. I get to meet all my internet friends that way. And I'm always astounded by the work that people put in to show up and talk about it and to even just the different things that I learn from everyone. It is so much fun. So I hope it's as much fun to listen to as it is for me to do because I really enjoy it. So part of me doesn't care if people are listening or not because I actually get a lot out of it. But it is, I hope that it's as beneficial for other people as it is for me just going through the process.
I mean, I absolutely love listening. My favorite episode is the one with the guy with the Irish accent. For non-biblical reasons, it's just really fun to listen.
Fun, I know.
But I just love it's like a teleportation to a small group and with a different group of Christians talking every time. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, my favorite episode's the one with this guy named was it Nathan? Wheat or something?
I don't need to be puffed up any more than I already puffed myself.
I mean, it's been really fun to talk through Acts because there's so many weird stories in Acts that it's just really fun to wrestle with it. So it was fun to have Nathan on and a bunch of other folks this season.
It's cool.
I just want to share a few more things just because I'm really impressed by all the things you're doing. And then maybe we can hear a little bit about how you got to this point. So you've got a website, kateboyd.co.
Yep.
I think that's kind of the central hub where if you got there, you could get to.
Yeah. If you get there, you can find everything else.
And there's resources, there's a newsletter. You've got a pretty active Reels / Instagram presence.
Yep.
And then at the same time, you're working and going to seminary. That sounds like a lot.
It can be.
So I noticed on your website, you mentioned that you are standing in the messy middle. And hashtag messy middle Christian. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. So what I sort of found, I guess, okay, I'll rewind a little. So, I mean, I think right now deconstruction feels like a big craze, right? Where everyone is sort of going through it, or at least at this point, everyone's talking about it. I've said before that I don't think of my deconstruction as a deconstruction, but more of like a disentangling, because I sort of realized that a lot of my faith was tangled up with a lot of cultural things that aren't actually necessary, but I thought they were. They were, the things that I fought the hardest for were actually things that like aren't that big of a deal in the long run, or historically, or any of that. And I think over the last few years, a lot of us, at least as a person who recently sort of left the evangelical circles, I know a lot of people like me who are sort of wrestling through what we've seen the white American evangelical church become over the last few years. And so we're kind of like navigating this, what feels like a weird land, because we haven't like the people that raised us in the faith are sort of, it feels like they're choosing other things, or they're not living it out the way that we thought that they would, or that we thought that they taught us to do. And so you sort of like get thrown into this land where you're questioning a lot of things and you're figuring it out, and you have some doubts, but you still have faith. And so I think for me, it's really about inhabiting this space where we are sure of Jesus, and we're sure of a lot of, all like the big important things, but we know that there's a lot that we haven't figured out. And maybe we don't quite have a super solid place to land, but we at least have a foundation built that we're working on maintaining and rebuilding. And so that's sort of like, if you go to my website too, you'll see the manifesto, which is just sort of like, these are the things that we believe, like that we feel strongly about. And there are things, about who Jesus is, and that we belong together, and how we want to practice and look at our faith. But there's a whole lot that maybe we would disagree about, or that we have doubts about, or that we're figuring out. And so creating a space where we can have questions and wrestle with big ideas, and go back to scripture the way, from the beginning, and looking at it now from our vantage point, instead of just sort of accepting all the things that we thought we knew about it, or that people told us about, and really just coming to it freshly and letting the Holy Spirit do his work in this time without fear or judgment. And I think that's really the space that I'm trying to do. And I'm also just trying to sort of help people walk through some of that, because I think we're seeing that it's really hard to do by yourself. So if you have somebody who can kind of hold your hand, or at least say, hey, let's do this together, that's really what I hope people find when they find me.
Cool.
I absolutely love that. And something that we've been struggling with is like, what's another word that's not deconstruction? Because it just is a harsh, like you're either against it or for it, or it means something different to different people. And like you said, it's a little bit trendy. And so I'm kind of curious, like the people who go through this, I feel like often go through it at different times, or go through it alone sometimes. And the first feeling is like, there's something wrong with me, or I think a lot of people don't feel like there's a middle that they're allowed to inhabit. So how did you come to to start fighting for that turf that's like in the middle, that, because people weren't kind of offering up that choice, I don't think.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people still don't offer up that choice. I mean, I think there are fundamentalists on every side, right? I think we think of fundamentalism as a specifically conservative thing. Maybe that's because how it's been used for us. And I also want to be careful of saying, like, this is the middle where we're just going to pick a centrist view on everything. Like, I don't think that's it either. It's really about giving yourself space to figure it out, right? And yeah, I mean, I didn't have a safe space to do it when I was going through it. Mine was really happening, a decade ago, and over the last, has sort of slowed a little bit over the last few years, but I think it's a process. If we're healthy, we're always re-examining what we believe and making sure that, we haven't tangled it up in something else. And so, I think it's a lifelong process. And I just started to notice that like people were sort of demanding me to have everything figured out, or to like stand here or there. And I was like, I want to be able to say that I have it figured out, but I don't yet. Here's what I know for sure. I'm going to hold tight to that. or like, this is what I believe to be true. Let's hang out here. We all agree on that part. So let's be cool. And, let's give ourselves space to agree and disagree and to learn about things and to ask questions. Because I sort of discovered that a lot of what I grew up in that was called discipleship is really more of like an indoctrination, right? Like, this is what you believe and this is how we behave and you can't question any of it. But that's sort of like, I don't know, I feel like that kills faith in a way. Like, there's an aspect of like certainty when you haven't wrestled to come to that feels very like weak and frail. And I think that's why people respond in such different ways. I always talk about like people, they either double down, they demolish, or they disentangle. And so I was like, I'm committed to Jesus. That was never a question for me. I know for some people that is a question, and I think that's fair given what a lot of people have gone through. I was always committed to Jesus and to church. And so I was like, but I feel like there are things that are wrapped up in this. So I was lucky that I had some people who sort of understood where I was coming from, given the circumstances I was in at the time, that I could sort of talk about some of these thoughts with. But yeah, a lot of people are sort of out on their own and doing it. And I think there is power in just sort of admitting it. And the more you talk about things, what I've found is the more I talk about things, the more it gives courage to other people to talk about things. And so I've always tried to embody the idea of like, I'm going to go first. And that way other people feel comfortable going too, like I always, when I would lead small groups at church, I'm like, I'll be the weird one. I'll make it awkward. I'll say the hard thing. You know what I mean? Like I'll be vulnerable first because I think that helps create the environment. And I think, and not just to create an environment so that everybody's vulnerable, but it gives people like permission to do that too. And so right. I like want to be a permission giver. Because I think that's like the convictions I have now, I am solid in because I've taken the time to figure it out. But it's okay for that to be sort of like fluffy and ambiguous for a little while because it takes time to figure that out. And it's it can be a long discerning process that does require a lot. It requires a lot of like looking and conversation and study and prayer. And so as you work it out, with fear and trembling, we're all figuring it out. And so why not expect that as part of the process and make it part of the process? Because I think it's natural and it's healthy rather than just sort of demanding everyone believe no matter what. And I think that's sort of where it gets sort of tricky. So yeah, I think I just want to be a permission giver and to give people space to do that.
Yeah, with what you mentioned about how faith, well, I see, people have said this before, me, but certainty is kind of the absence of faith in some ways. If you are like so certain you're never going to ever look at that ever again, I don't know, it's like you stop thinking about it.
There's no leap to take too. You're already there.
And so some people like ultra fundamentalists tend to say, I'm never going to question anything. And there's people all the way on the other direction, like I'm questioning absolutely everything down to the core. And you mentioned that you had things that are solid that you figured out. How do you know when to stop questioning, or should you stop questioning, or is that even the right question to ask?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just sort of, I think on one hand you just sort of know, I think when you sort of get to the end of wrestling with something and you feel, I just felt really peaceful and settled in my soul about some things. And that was enough for me. Now, is that to say that I will never revisit those? No, I think that's healthy. I think it's a cyclical thing. And there will always be circumstances sometimes that like force us into that reconsideration. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, I do think we semi-arrive, but that shouldn't be static forever. Like, I think we continue to move through, and it may even still evolve over time. But and maybe other people are better with ambiguity than I am. Like, I know I talk about all of this, but I'm also a person who sort of needs to figure things out. And so I pull things apart until I get to a point where I figure things out. So maybe people are okay with like gray and squishy. That's harder for me. So I need to sort of like find a solid place. And some people are okay with not doing that. And I think,
Oh, yeah, everybody's different.
I think, yeah, I was like, I think that's totally okay too. So for me, I'd say it's probably going to be cyclical, and it'll come up in different ways throughout my life, different circumstances, forcing me to think through different things. So I definitely don't imagine that everything I believe today or that I feel convicted of today will remain that way forever. But I feel really good about the convictions I have right now.
I really love the idea of giving permission, and I feel like part of the permission is to drop a facade or kind of a mask that's fake, but still stay in the community and stay in the struggle around the people, but without having to look or appear to have it all figured out, or to be able to say out loud, here's a thing that I'm struggling with or working through. And that kind of just sounds like shepherding to me a little bit, but culturally, but at the same time, it also sounds scary and a little bit counter church cultural to be saying those things out loud. I'm a little bit interested, as you were kind of moving through, what kind of permission did you have to say those things out loud? And then how did you get to a place, and kind of who helped you get there to start to realize that it's okay to both be working through this and still be part of the church?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So for me, a lot of my big shifts happened because I used to have a job where I did marketing for a missions agency. So part of my job was to actually go on documentary trips and sit, across from people in rooms of various types and hear how God was working in their lives, hear how the church was growing or thriving or working or ministering in whatever region I was in. And it's almost like, when you go to camp or you go to like a short-term mission trip and that like re-entry is like really hard. That was like for me, except I suddenly was I didn't feel like really great about myself. I was suddenly very aware of the idea or the reality that I did not practice my faith with as much obedience and sincerity as these people did. Or I did not, all of the hardships I think I face in my faith are like nothing to some of these people. And that's not to say that other people's struggles aren't valid. I have a pretty privileged life, so that's not saying that much for me. Like, but it just sort of like made me realize, and it made me go, okay, well, if this is true and if this is okay, and I believe this is good and this is, glorifying to God here, what does that mean about how my church practices or what I believe about XYZ in the church or in faith or whatever? And I really had to sort of reorient myself and go, what does it mean to have a faith that works all over the world, in every time, in every place, in every context? And that doesn't mean that it's not contextualized, right? But it does mean that the principle behind the thing has to transfer. And so that was sort of the lens that I had to unpack that with. Now, fortunately, I worked at a missions agency where a lot of people had gone through that same thing. And so I had a good community of people there for a while that I was able to unpack that with. It was a little bit harder in my actual church community because those weren't things they were used to wrestling with, or that they even wanted to wrestle with. And so some of that was awkward. My husband was a trooper. I even took him on a trip with me because I was like, you need to understand. And he did that. We went overseas together for a couple of weeks, and that was really helpful for us and for him. And I think that ultimately was one of the better things we did for our marriage, was because I needed him to understand what it felt like to come back and the things that I was wrestling with that I hadn't really had a chance to, that is hard to put into words, when really you just have sort of like story upon story, experience upon experience. And so over time, I found a couple of people that I could ask questions or wrestle with or just talk about stuff. I like having sort of those like big esoteric, like random discussions about things, because sometimes you just want to like chop it up about like stuff like that. And I do anyway. I really enjoy sort of just like exploring and asking big questions and seeing what people, where it goes. And so I did have a handful of people, but it did sort of feel like in bigger church settings, or even like in our small group, which was, 15 to 20 people at a time, not everyone there felt super safe to talk to. So it's really just sort of like, but that was sort of trial and error. You kind of have to like test the waters with a couple of people in like some mild ways in order to see what is like who and what is safe. So I had some built-in communities that, and I think that sort of started with those like built-in communities where we all had at least a common experience around this that we could build off of. But yeah, it was definitely a lot harder with people who didn't have those common experiences.
I just want to circle back that I've never heard anyone say this. I don't know how I missed this, but just the idea of a faith that works all over the world is a really profound thing. Just like, what would that look like, or what is that? And it doesn't take a whole lot of experiences to realize, I guess, some of the things that are biggest for us, like you said, are non-existent or not non-issues if you fly enough miles away.
Yeah. And I'll also say, a lot of people don't agree with me on where that takes me sometimes.
Sure. Yeah.
And I get that because, every tradition of Christianity has different theology around different things. But for me, it has to be transfer. Like that has just become so important. The witness of those people, I cannot bring myself to call unfaithful when I have heard their stories and I've seen their hearts and I've seen how they care for people. And so if that means that some of my beliefs about church or the sacraments or who can lead and who can't have been adjusted, I'm okay with that because that means I can honor those people that changed my life over there.
Yeah. This is a random nerd aside real quick, but sometimes the question is more valuable, I think, than the answer. So like if you wrote out, here is the church that works all over the world, 100 people would have different visions of that. But the question is a great starting point for a journey. And that's how Einstein came up with his theory of general relativity, was he was like, what if physics worked in every frame of reference? And then he just daydreamt about it, right? And came up, and now we know about black holes and gravity and space-time because of just the curiosity of the very basic, simple kind of question, like, what parts of my faith are cultural and what parts of my faith go all the way down to kind of the basics. So I really like that.
Yeah. And it's okay to have both, but it's recognizing when one is cultural and when one is Christian, biblical, whatever label you want to put on it.
Did any of those things surprise you when you came across them? You're like, okay, this is a cultural thing. I didn't realize it was cultural.
I mean, I guess maybe I'll talk about some of the shifts. I would say the number one shift, or like what looks like the biggest shift in my life, was my change into affirming women in leadership from this. Because I went overseas and, if you look at the statistics, but even if you meet the people on the ground, you'll see that women tend to come to faith first in these communities because they're community people, right? And they, they have friends and they're talking to people and they're doing that. They're doing a lot of leading and, just sort of like sitting back and realizing that a woman may be a believer for 10 years and then a man could come along and become a believer, and some people would say now he's supposed to be in charge because he is a man and she's not. And I'm like, that makes no sense. Like, it just doesn't make sense, right? And there are people who would build in exceptions or whatever, well, there were no worthy men or men who wanted to lead or whatever. And so it really just like made me explore and, digging into that and digging into some of the biblical witness around like women who were in leadership, or even how people like Jesus and Paul put women in those places. It really opened my mind to that because I suddenly realized that this paradigm that I had for whether or not women could lead had to work in these places where the church doesn't look like it does here, where we have all these resources and we have seminaries and years of training and like all these barriers to entry that are helpful barriers in a lot of ways, but I guess not helpful barriers, but helpful resources. And so I think it was important for me to open that up. And so that's really where that opened for me. So it was a lot of little things like that. Like I wouldn't even say that I shifted hugely on a lot of stuff. But being able to sort of like look through it through that global lens in order to make something biblical or Christian or necessary has been a helpful frame for me, because it allows me to hold a lot of tension, but I think it also gets closer to, I don't know, the God who wants people to come in, right? The God who wants people to thrive and flourish, and that's what I believe the church is for. And so I think examining a lot of that has been really important since then. So, I mean, there's probably 100 things that are like that are a little like that.
Sure.
But that's probably like the biggest one I can point to that I think a lot of people will get.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I can track with that. Had a lot of the same feelings myself.
I feel like women in leadership in our tradition, that there were always these weird loopholes that kind of exposed when legalism is happening. That's when you get weird loopholes. But one of them was missionary work.
Right.
That's always been a strange phenomenon. And I feel like there's a missionary paradox that happens that's also very similar to kind of the seminary problem, and you're about to have kind of a double dose, where you go as a missionary, it's experiences or people or cultures or just that new perspective. Then you come back, and that's when you have a crisis. And as a seminarian, you maybe learn deeper theology or history of the Bible or history of the church or etc. And so now you're equipped with this, like you're holding this torch of like all this excitement or nuance or whatever it is. But then you come back, and it's very difficult to share that with people who haven't experienced it for themselves. We equip a seminarian and then send them to a church where they're not going to like those ideas that person is leading. So how was your experience kind of initially, and how have you learned how to bring your perspectives or your experiences to people who haven't had those firsthand?
I mean, like I said, it was really hard sort of like jumping in and getting back in. I think part of me also felt kind of resentful of my American church experience whenever I looked at like the sincerity of some of the experiences overseas in the churches I got to witness there. And so I sort of had to work through that and realize that no community is perfect. And me trying to idolize, have this ideal version of what community is might actually be keeping me from having any kind of community. So that was sort of the first thing that I kind of had to wrestle with, and just know that I could introduce it little by little. So for me, it's mostly just been like sharing stories, or when we talk about the Bible, I bring those perspectives and the things that we learn, whether I'm learning it in school or I learned it by rereading, or there's a story or somebody told me something. Like, I think it's being okay with accepting experiences as a valid filter too. Like, I think there's a bunch of sort of like why I love the Wesleyan quadrilateral, right? It allows for that tradition and experience and reason and scripture to go together, and not in a way that negates each other, but illuminates all of that. And so I think that's been really helpful for me, because even something that is subjective, like experience, can bring enlightenment. And so that's been helpful. And so, yeah, I think it's been a lot of like sharing stories and like being okay with sharing stories from my time overseas as well, so that when I talk about a shift or I talk about something, there's a context for it that I've created or brought with me, because I don't expect everyone to jump to where I am. But I also think there's like a way of, I think you have to sort of like temper stuff too. Like, there's a lot of things I believe about how we read the Bible and everything now that would probably make some of my old friends like, whoa, she doesn't take it seriously, or whoa, we have to like watch out. And I'm like, no, these are actually just like accepted things that your pastor probably learned too. You just don't see him do that every week. And so, but this is the process, and these are the questions he's asking and how he's approaching it. And so it's just sort of like, again, it's like permission, right? And that's part of why too, I find it really important, not just to teach about the thing itself, but to like teach the process of it. You know what I mean? Because I'd rather people have tools that they can take with them all the time and recreate everything than just have like this little nugget of knowledge that I gave them. Though that's really fun for me too. I literally play trivia for fun. I love learning things, and I love giving people little nuggets of knowledge. And I think that's fun and important, but I would much rather train someone or give someone tools or help people, give them questions or orient them. And that's even sort of been my approach to seminary this time around. So I actually went to seminary right out of college, a very different seminary to the one I go to now. And I always say, like, back then I wanted to know the answers, and now I want to have better questions. Like, now that I'm in seminary again, I want to have better questions so that I can take those with me, because my knowledge may change or what I believe may shift a little bit over time. But if I have good questions and like a good set of tools, then I know how to walk through that, and I won't be stuck again, right? Like, I'll have at least things to lean on to work through in order to make that happen. And I think that's something that I didn't always have before.
So as you're talking to people, we've talked to quite a few folks who, or at least I have, who are kind of afraid to start asking questions and start going down that path. And so how would you help people along, like, overcome that discomfort, or because there are some people in the quote unquote deconstruction movement who have, like, all the way to atheism, and some people are afraid of that and they don't want to go there. Like, I'm gonna get sucked into it. How do you balance that, or help somebody along the lines of someone who's wanting to start asking hard questions that they've never asked before?
Well, I do think it starts with a willingness. Like, until you're willing to ask questions, like, until you're at some point, you just sort of like have to be brave. And I think it's trusting your faith, trusting your belief, trusting God and what you know to be true about him. And that may expand, but I think I think we fear that our faith is fragile, and so it'll break if we start opening it. And I know this sounds very new agey. I'm not new agey at all, but I think I think it's very much like you have to just sort of like maybe dip your toe, right? Like, ask a little question or go back to something that feels pretty solid. Like, I always tell people, if you're going to deconstruct or you're going to ask questions, you need to figure out what you think of Jesus first, right? Because you can save yourself a whole lot of time if you figure out what you think about Jesus. Yeah. Because if you don't believe in that, or you decide something else, like, you don't have to go through deconstructing everything else. You can deconvert if that's how you feel. Like, I hope that's not the case for you. I long for everybody to be in relationship with God through Christ. That's my whole jam. But I think if you're not afraid, like, I think you have to know what you're willing to look at, and even start with something small. Maybe start with something that's not that important to you, right? I think everyone's going to jump at it differently. Some people will jump in and just sort of like demolish everything and then start looking around to build things up. That's not how I did it. I was like, I'm still committed to Jesus. I still believe in, the goodness of the church at large. What do I need to examine? What do I need to get clear in order to feel a little more solid? And I actually found that there were a lot of things that I still believe, that I believed then. And there are some things that have expanded or changed. I think mostly the application of my faith has changed more than my faith itself. But you have to sort of be willing to answer the questions or to ask the questions and be willing to sort of follow the path. And just, I mean, at some point you do have to trust that even this God uses to your good. Like it's not something you have to fear. There's a lot of people who have walked through figuring out, like retooling the way that their lives are. Like deconstruction isn't actually a new phenomenon.
Sure.
I would argue Jesus was doing it with the disciples, with the Pharisees, with everybody in the Gospels. The reformers did it with their faith, when they were making things over and examining things. So I think like rooting it historically and realizing that it's okay and it's healthy, and then dipping your toe in whichever way feels safest to you to start. But also just trusting that the goodness of God is there to carry you through too.
Yeah. Having some faith in your faith.
Yeah.
I feel like that, like you just alluded to that permission again. Like, I think one reason people are afraid to ask the questions is they think that their only example that they know of is some friend that went off the deep end or something. Like there aren't people who are living out this and then that it's part of their genuine faith journey and they end up somewhere kind of more mature or more solid at the end of it. It like that all stays on the inside. The pastor that has the doubts doesn't get up there and say, preach the sermon and say like, I'm not sure what I think about this right now, because they get fired or or they just kind of keep that on the inside until they figure it out. But the entire something I've learned through you, like this, the entire book of Acts is a story of watching the church disentangle and kind of answer the question like, let's make a faith that works outside Jerusalem.
Right.
Like they're just starting small and getting it wrong, and there's forward movement even though it's messy. Like they didn't get it perfect and then the gospel spread, or get it right and then the gospel spread. They got it wrong, and the gospel spread anyways, and then they kind of fixed it some and then backslid, and we're watching that story.
Yeah. It's the whole New Testament, right? Like this is why Paul wrote letters to people. This is why, James, John, Peter wrote letters to the different churches to encourage them, to admonish them, to correct them. Like this is just, it's part of the process. And as culture changes, as society changes, we meet maybe not different challenges. I mean, they're sort of like the same challenges dressed up differently. And as we do, we have to rise to the occasion and figure out what it looks like to live now, here and now, with this faith that we have. So yeah, I think it's really important that we look at the Bible that way and look at it as sort of a source of wisdom, and even look at how they worked through that in community and figured it out together. And we're willing to be corrected. I mean, I just recorded the part where Priscilla and Aquila correct Apollos, and he's like not mad about it. He's like, great, thank you, let's go. And he like picks up and he keeps going. And so I think there's a good dose of humility that we have to carry with us, even as we figure things out. Even though I know what I'm convicted of now, I believe there are a lot of people who are convicted in good faith of different conclusions from me, And so it's really hard to be like, I think you're wrong, or I believe differently, but I believe you are trying to be faithful like I'm trying to be faithful. So let's hold that together and know that we probably are all messing it up somehow, right? Like we're all messing it up. We're not going to figure it out perfectly. But yeah, bringing humility with you. And I think working through this process, at least for me, has been the biggest humility builder, because I've realized how much I don't know, or how much I wasn't exposed to before, or how many different ways you can look at the same passage and come out with something different. Like the more I learn, the more I find it hard to fault hardly anyone, aside from like people who abuse those things, especially willfully. That, we're all just navigating, we're managing the best that we can so we can have some grace and humility. And I think that's something that needs to be in these conversations a little bit more too.
Yeah.
I love too that you're bringing people along with you, because something that challenges me, I almost never just discover some paradigm shifting thing on my own or like studying or reading the Bible, I'll find cool things, but they're almost always fruit of something else that's been going on in my life, and then I can see it finally. But as you bring people in, or it's a community, like that's when I see someone else who has, like you just said, the Wesleyan quadrilateral, and I was like, what is the Wesleyan?
Yeah, same.
You know, and
sorry.
and then I was like, it's probably a square. And you said tradition, experience, scripture, and reason, so that's got to be it. So but that's happened on your show, and that happens with me just when I talk with other Christians. Someone will say, and of course this passage means this, and I'm like, what? I've never heard that in my life. What do you mean? You know, you have these foundational assumptions that I am just learned something just from like running into another Christian, kind of figuring out on their own as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the value of community. And I think that's why I really hate that a lot of people go through this alone, because there is so much value in us just not just having the permission to talk about it together, but in sharing that together. And I think that's how I think the Holy Spirit and community are often the guardrails through the faith whenever there is no special training, and there maybe isn't, you know, not everyone has a Bible in their home or even the Bible translated into their language. Like there's a lot of barriers, but the Holy Spirit and community are things that we all have if we're believers. For the most part, I think community is limited for some people in adverse circumstances around the world. But those are the things that we can rely on. And I think the Spirit uses those himself, obviously, and community in order, you know, to sharpen us and to open our eyes to different things and to bring us along together. And so I think it's really important to have that aspect, which is part of why I love having so many people on my podcast that way, because it's really fun for me to see. And I purposely like try to pair people up from different traditions or like different places that they live, because I want to hear how they experience it differently. And that's really fun. And I think that's really valuable for us as believers.
Yeah, we so easily get stuck on our track or our own little slice of the faith, you know, Christendom, whatever you want to call it, that we think that that's the only thing that there is, and that anything else is probably screwed up some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And there's, you know, I having done mission work myself in Germany, just the forced different view of that. And so when you were talking about how that really changed your view, just the forced difference really brings a lot of things to light that, and I suddenly I found myself like prioritizing things that I used to think, oh, everything's equal, you know, everything's equal as importance wise, as far as what we should do, what we shouldn't do, what we should believe, and all that kind of thing. And you suddenly realize that once that hits the road, that becomes a very different kind of a situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I identify as a messy middle Christian, absolutely, and I'm thankful for that terminology. Also, just a messy Christian, and messy.
I think we're all messy Christians,
Yeah.
even if we think that we're not.
Definitely. And so something I'm curious about as you've kind of moved through this, how have you seen God working, and what surprises have you encountered? What have you run into that's been unexpected?
Ooh. Gosh, I mean, so many things sort of feel unexpected. If you'd asked me 5 years ago if this is what I would be doing, I would have said no. I was very, I had my own business. I was doing my own thing. I was like really happy. Well, mostly happy. I was successful. I was crumbling mentally, but on the surface, everything looked great. And, you know, a bunch of things sort of like forced me in a different direction. I never would have thought that I'd be back at seminary. I was pretty convinced that God had shut that door, and I was content with that for the most part. I didn't believe that I needed seminary, though I really enjoy getting to do it, and now it's a big blessing for me. I wouldn't have expected that I, would have left my church recently and like been finding a new one. I feel like, and all of that, I feel like everything that happy is also sad. Like there's always those things are wrapped up so much together because one begets the other in a lot of ways in my life. And so it's kind of hard to like point to one thing or to even separate like the grief and the joy, because I think they're so together in a lot of different instances. I've stopped making plans for my life because, you know, God changes them constantly. So I'm just sort of like along for the ride now. We just sort of like follow. I have some goals and, you know, that I feel led that he's pointed me to, but until those materialize, we just sort of like hang out and keep doing our thing. And I think that's been really healthy for me as well, because I'm a high achiever. I'm a doer. I like getting things done. I like everyone knowing just how good I am at everything. And so it has
I have that too.
It has been a really stretching experience to say, I don't know where God wants me, but I'm just here. And I think that's been helpful and healthy for me to learn to be more present and even embedded in my community, and to find ways to use my gifts that are here and now instead of always sort of like delaying them for the big thing or the big goal or the next whatever. And so, yeah, I think I'm at this point in my life just trying to learn to be faithful in the spot that I'm in at the moment.
I should say I have the thing where I want people to know what I'm doing, but I don't have the achiever part of it. So it's like the worst of both worlds. I'm not actually doing things, but I want people to think that I'm doing things.
Is that an Enneagram 5 thing? You guys are both 5s. So,
so personally, I think we're all three of us are Enneagram 5s. Yeah.
Are we?
But
I'm not.
Steve hasn't dug into it, so that's a point against.
We had a whole
Have you?
a whole episode about it.
No, I forgot.
I think Enneagram 5s all want everyone to know how much we know. Not necessarily how much we do, but I think those things sort of like inevitably go together because we want to be experts at whatever it is that we're doing. The hard part is it's hard to be an expert Christian, unfortunately. Though a lot of people have made a lot of money saying that they are. I think it's really hard to be an expert Christian. And so I am destined to be disappointed in my achievement status for the rest of my life. But it's fun learning along the way.
Yeah, anybody who calls himself an expert Christian concerns me.
Yeah. That'd be a red flag for me personally.
In areas of it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like at self-sacrifice and self-lowering and service? You're the best at that?
I'm the best. I'm the most humble man in the world.
Yeah.
Or
do you just know the most about what a best Christian should be? There's a big difference between. That's my constant life struggle.
As long as you're right, that's what matters.
Being right is definitely the most important.
I want to live 100% of my faith directly in my brain, and I struggle to get any percent of it like into my embodied, incarnate experience. So
it helps to imagine it, or to put. What helps me, because I'm obviously the same way. It helps me to either imagine myself doing it, or to imagine someone else doing it. Like, I don't know, almost like you feel like you have an out-of-body experience, like imagining yourself doing it, and then it's sort of like it jumpstarts some of that embodiment stuff.
Are you manifesting? Are you teaching me how to manifest right now?
Yeah. No, just meditate and focus, and everything you want will come to you. I will say meditation does really help me, because I can sort of like, it helps me like tune into like my breath and my body. Mm-hmm. But I
think meditation's very underrated.
Yeah.
No, I actually do appreciate that tip, because I struggle to get out of the brain. Any help.
I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. I recently bought a pound of clay because I was like, what is more like earthbound than just like molding clay? But I'm not good at it. So I was like, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, I only do hobbies I'm good at too. If I'm not good at it within like a week, I'm like, not doing it. This is no fun.
Yeah.
It's no fun to be bad at things.
Yeah, so how's that Hebrew class coming along?
I had a friend ask me once, like, what are my hobbies? And I was like, winning at stuff? I don't know.
Inviting people over to play games, but I have to swap out the people group with,
I was was like, if it's something I'm good at, I want to do it. And if I'm not, I don't. That's the answer.
Yeah, same.
Well, you guys are in good company with C.S. Lewis because he. I remember. You ever seen the movie Shadowlands where?
Yeah, but it's been
Anthony
a really
Hopkins.
long time.
Anthony Hopkins plays C.S. Lewis. Fascinating. Anyway, in it, his brother, I think, or one of his friends, gets on him. He's like, "You have crafted your world where you are the smartest person in every room you walk into." It's like, I know people like that.
That sounds like a great world.
That sounds fantastic. Yeah.
I love
it. Really limits the rooms I can walk into, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, I do my best.
There aren't a lot of rooms I get to go in, which is fine because I'm an introvert and I don't want to be there anyway. So
rooms with people in them, out. Well, Kate, I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah.
This has been really great. And I've got your mission statement here. First of all, I'm just going to compliment your website because it is difficult for me to boil down ideas to the simple, what am I trying to say here? And every page has some of that kind of editing and thinking work that has happened. So I highly encourage people to go to your website, kateboyd.co. We'll put it in the notes. But you've got this mission that I feel like we kind of share here on the show. So you say you're making a space for believers who find themselves in the messy middle between conservative and progressive, between loving the church and leaving it, and helping navigate those tensions of Christian life so that we can more confidently walk the lines between doubt and certainty, faith and action, with love and grace for all. Just like such a great...
It's actually very wordy. I wish it was shorter, but it is what it is.
Oh no, it's fantastic. But
it was hard to capture everything that I wanted to say. So the copywriter in me is like, I wish it was pithier, but no.
You should try a shape, a quadrilateral, an equal, I don't know, a parallelogram. See if you can just get it into a triangle and you know.
Forwards.
I do have a thing called the discipleship pyramid. So I love coming up with frameworks like that. Like that's sort of, I love sitting around and doing that. That's like how my brain works.
So you got your website, your newsletter, your podcast, your speaking events, your seminary, your dog, your husband.
Yep.
Busy woman. Best of luck.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. This was fun.
And we'll like Nathan said, we'll stick all the links to all of Kate's stuff in the show notes, and I'll talk to you again sometime soon.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, thanks for listening. We hope you got something out of the episode today. Check the show notes in your podcast app for all the links and references that were made, or you can find it all at followingthefire.com. If you'd like to support the show, please go to patreon.com/followingthefire to become a patron. And of course, we'd love it if you rate the podcast and share it with others. See you later.
And I'll give you all my heart. Don't you know it's all I have? Even on my heart can't compare with what you're worth. I have been running almost all my life, but you always chase me down.